Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're here, because today we have a truly fascinating journey ahead of us. We're going to demystify exactly how we study complex, deeply human behaviors in language contexts. If you've ever found yourself wondering how researchers investigate the messy, beautiful reality of how people actually learn and use language in the real world, well, you're in the exact right place. We're unpacking qualitative methods in applied linguistics, and by the time we wrap up, you're going to have a completely new lens for looking at the social world around you. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to think about this for a second. How do you actually measure a feeling? Like, if you're a census taker, your job is pretty simple, right? You just do a head count. You count the number of people, maybe tabulate test scores, or log the frequency of an event. But what if you need to understand the deeper human experience? A qualitative researcher is honestly a lot more like a detective. They aren't trying to count feelings, they're trying to figure out the actual quality and the nature of an experience.
And this brings us to kind of the core idea here. Meaning over numbers. Think about a standard quantitative question, like how many students avoid speaking? That's super easily answerable by just counting. But a qualitative question asks, wait, why do they avoid speaking? Or what does it actually feel like for that student in that exact moment? To answer that, you can't just hand out a multiple choice test. You have to literally sit down and listen closely to students describing their own lived experiences. And applied linguistics is just absolutely saturated with these kinds of meaning-rich questions. To get us to that level of understanding, we're going to follow a highly structured roadmap today. We'll start with going beyond the numbers, check out the qualitative toolkit, figure out how to find the right voices, decode the data, ensure trustworthiness, and finally put it all into practice. All right, part one, beyond the numbers, understanding the philosophy behind qualitative research. Before we can just run out and start interviewing people, we have to understand the paradigm shift happening beneath the surface here. For a long time, research was dominated by this idea called positivism, basically the belief that there's one single, measurable, objective reality out there waiting to be discovered. But qualitative research is built on a totally different foundation, mostly based on interpretivism. This basically means reality is socially constructed. Think about it. If 5 people experience the exact same language classroom, they might walk away with 5 completely different, yet equally valid interpretations of what just happened. As qualitative researchers, we aren't chasing a single objective truth. We want to know how people make sense of their world. We rely on constructivism, which means knowledge is actually built through the interaction between the researcher and the participants. You aren't an invisible, neutral observer. Your presence actively shapes what gets learned.
Moving on to part two, the qualitative toolkit, choosing the right design and data methods. Once we understand that our goal is exploring these multiple realities in natural settings, we need the right tools for the job.
And this brilliantly illustrates how you actually pick those tools. A lot of times, students think they can just pick their favorite research design, but it doesn't work like that. Your design is dictated exactly by the shape of your specific research puzzle. For instance, if you want to know what's happening in one specific program in depth, you'd use a case study. Need to solve a problem in your own local classroom? That's action research. If you're exploring a whole community's culture, you're looking at ethnography. And if you need to build a theory completely from the ground up to explain a process, you'd go with grounded theory. No matter which design you choose from that list, you're probably going to pull from these common data collection methods. Interviews are by far the most widely used tool in applied linguistics, specifically semi-structured interviews. These are great because they give you a prepared guide of core questions, but they leave you the flexibility to go off script and follow up on interesting responses. But notice something here. In all of these methods, from focus groups to reflective journals, the researcher is the key instrument. You aren't relying on a standardized test. Your own sensitivity, your self-awareness, that is what directly affects the quality of the data.
Okay, part three, finding the right voices, moving from random sampling to deliberate selection. So, we've got our research question, we've got our toolkit. The next major step is figuring out exactly who we are going to study. If you're doing quantitative research, you want random, statistically representative samples. Basically, you want a huge, random crowd so you can generalize to a whole population. But in qualitative research, we want deliberate, information-rich selection. We actually want to handpick the most insightful experts or the most relevant individuals who can give us deep, highly contextualized understanding about our specific puzzle.
We call this purposive sampling, and there are a bunch of ways to do it. You might use judgment sampling, where you deliberately choose experienced teachers, for example, because they have the exact knowledge you need. You might use snowball sampling, where one participant introduces you to another, which is fantastic for hard-to-reach populations. There's convenience sampling, literally just pulling from who is readily accessible to you, or maximum variation sampling, where you actively seek out incredibly diverse cases just to get the widest possible range of perspectives. And because we're going for depth over breadth here, qualitative sample sizes are typically pretty small, often just between 5 and 30 participants.
So the crucial point is, how do you actually know when to stop? Like if you're only interviewing 15 people, how do you know you've done enough? The answer is data saturation. This is kind of a magic moment during your ongoing data collection where the new interviews or observations you're doing just stop revealing any new themes. You keep hearing variations of the exact same concepts. When that happens, it tells you that you've successfully captured the range of relevant variation for your study.
Which brings us to part 4, decoding the data, the iterative process of thematic analysis. Once we've collected all this incredibly rich, complex data, we have to somehow make sense of it. Shifting from collecting data to analyzing it can definitely feel a bit overwhelming. But remember, this isn't a rigid math formula. It's overlapping, recursive, and super inductive. Here's a step-by-step look at how you turn raw audio into meaningful themes. First, transcription, getting it all typed out verbatim. Then, familiarization, reading and rereading the data until you're just completely immersed in it. Step 3 is initial or open coding. This is where you label meaningful chunks of text with short descriptive tags. Sometimes we even use the participants' exact words for these tags, which we call in vivo codes. From there, you search for broader themes by grouping related codes together. And finally, you clearly define and name those themes. See? You're building from the ground up, letting the patterns emerge totally organically from the data itself.
All right, part 5, ensuring trustworthiness, how qualitative research maintains rigorous standards. Now, we really need to address the elephant in the room here. Subjectivity. Because you, the researcher, are the instrument, critics sometimes ask, wait, is this all just your opinion? The answer is a resounding no. Qualitative inquiry has its own highly rigorous standards that are completely distinct from statistical validity.
We don't use terms like reliability and generalizability here. Instead, we rely on the 4 pillars of trustworthiness. First, we need credibility, confidence that our findings genuinely reflect the participants' experiences. Second, we look for transferability, providing enough rich detail so readers can decide if the findings actually apply to their own context. Third is dependability, keeping the research process super consistent. And finally, confirmability, ensuring the findings are shaped by the participants themselves and not just by researcher bias.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we achieve that credibility in practice. A prime example is triangulation. This basically means we don't just rely on one single interview. We combine multiple data sources, so maybe interviews plus classroom observations plus lesson plans. We also use techniques like member checking. This is where you take your interpretations right back to the participants and ask, hey, did I get this right? We also keep super clear audit trails of every single decision we make. These are the techniques that keep the researcher honest and ensure the findings are robust. Finally, part 6, putting it into practice, a real-world example, and some common pitfalls. Let's bring all these abstract concepts completely down to earth and step into a real-world applied linguistics scenario to see how this works from start to finish.
Imagine we're investigating English as a foreign language, or EFL teachers. Specifically, we want to know how experienced teachers understand and justify their choices about when and how to correct students' spoken errors. Because we want to understand their deeply personal reasoning, we choose an interview-based qualitative design. We purposefully sample 8 experienced teachers from different contexts. We sit down for 45-minute semi-structured interviews, and we ask them to walk us through recent moments when they deliberately decided not to correct an error.
After transcribing and openly coding all of that data, a totally fascinating theme emerges. We don't find a strict grammatical rulebook that they all follow. Instead, we find a theme we name correction as a relationship-sensitive judgment call. We discovered that these teachers are constantly reading a student's emotional state in the moment, literally prioritizing confidence over accuracy if a student is feeling vulnerable. This highly nuanced theme proves exactly why qualitative research is so vital. I mean, if we had just done a quantitative frequency counts of corrections per lesson, we would have completely missed the real story behind why teachers make those choices.
But of course, doing this right requires discipline. There are absolutely some common pitfalls you need to avoid. Never treat this as just asking people casual questions. You need a really clear design rationale. Don't force your data into preconceived categories from other studies. Let the codes emerge from the people you are actually talking to. Avoid cherry-picking quotations just to support your own bias. A rigorous qualitative researcher is actively searching for data that complicates the story. Never skip documenting your audit trail. And finally, never overclaim generalizability.
8 interviews do not speak for all EFL teachers everywhere, and honestly, they don't have to. The depth of the insight is where the true value lies.
Which brings us right back to you. Qualitative research offers such a powerful toolkit for understanding the lived, communicative dimensions of the world around us. So take a look at your own environment right now, your classroom, your workplace, your community. What is a complex how or why question about human experience that numbers alone could just never answer? The tools to uncover that reality are now literally in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you stay curious.